Good morning, or depending when you're listening to this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross and I was always told how to voice a radio, so I've made a podcast all about the Pokémon trading card game. And you're listening to PTCG Radio. First off, a massive thank you to everyone who got in touch after last week's podcast, re my audio situation. People like Mark Levy, amongst others, commented that the quality was a lot better than it has been in previous podcasts. The microphone was doing its work, but apparently the built-in pop filter was not good enough. I needed a new one. And special thanks to Dan, who I work with, who has fashioned me a pop filter out of some weird flexible black material and some pipe cleaners. No tights or coat hangers to hand, unfortunately. We're making do with what we've got. I've done a little bit of a test as suggested. It sounds a hell of a lot better, but I'll try and keep my P's to a minimum just in case. Now, you might find it's a little bit more echoey than usual today. That is something you should be expecting, because unfortunately I'm in a more echoey room due to having to actually set up the microphone and the pop filter somewhere. It's going to be an improvement over a few weeks, but I think we can all agree this is getting better. And hopefully the microphone is turned on so it's not picking up much of the echo, so we should be alright. Now this week we're going to be going through some new news, some new cards which have been released amongst some other little bits of news, and then we're going to be talking about Manectric. What we are not going to be going through today is a lot of City Championship results. We're going to mention it slightly because there's one I really want to have a quick word about, but we're going to be talking more about City Championships next week. With Manectric and all the news that's come out since last Wednesday, I think we've got enough to talk about without delving too deep into City Championships today. But that show is coming. That show is going to be next week, most probably. I've already got a few City Championship results together. I'll be hitting some of my friends up for more in the near future. But for now, we've got enough on our plate for today. So starting off the news today, and there have been some Gym Challenge promos. These are going to be given out in the Gym Challenge packs in Japan. For those that don't know, essentially you go to these Gym Challenge tournaments and you get a promotional booster pack. And there are 12 promos around these booster packs. Obviously, a bit more interesting than we get in the US and Europe and all of that. We get one promo card, which is basically just a funky reprint of a card we've already got. Not so in Japan. They have these special packs, have EXs and everything. Now, unfortunately, we don't have all of the cards, but we have two of them. First of all, we have a Flygon, and it's not terribly exciting, but only because we can't see it. Did I say Flygon? I meant, of course, Flygon-EX. It looks pretty gosh darn good. It's got an ability, we know that much, and it's got an attack which appears to do 60 or 80, maybe a little bit more, for what looks like a Grass 2 fighting and a colourless. We will know more when we get an official translation, or indeed an unofficial translation from a picture which is big enough to actually read. What we do have is a Lantern. It's a water type. Lantern has appeared in the card game in both electric and water types. This is a water type and it's not terribly good, but I have a special affinity for Lantern because my very first nationals I went to way back in, oh goodness, it must have been around about 2011, I played for Alligator Lantern. Think of it a bit like Blastoise Caldeo, because for Alligator essentially did the same thing, but Lantern was an electric that had a Poké Power at the time, which allowed it to turn into a water Pokemon, which hid a variety of weaknesses. And then I got stomped by a huge amount of jump plus. This particular Lantern has a weakness to grass and 100 HP. Anyone else notice how many water Pokemon nowadays are weak to grass, not lightning? It seems to be a lot. It's got one attack for a water for a water energy, which does 20 damage and heals 20, which is very meh. It has another attack for 2 water and a colourless that does 80 damage, and if you discard you have to discard one energy attached to Lantern, and then it confuses your opponent's Pokemon. So 2 water and a colourless, 80 plus confusion, and you have to discard an energy to do so. It's fine. It's not going to see a huge amount of play. Now, I talked last week about these Team Aqua and Team Magma Pokemon. The owners' Pokemon are coming out. We've had a few more of these revealed. Now, as has been brought up, I might have mentioned it last week on the podcast, but let me repeat it now even if I did. Essentially, we don't know if these cards are good or not. I told you about Team Aqua's Kyogre-EX and Team Magma's Groudon-EX, and I told you they were fairly underwhelming. But as with everything from SP to Plasma Pokemon, we do often get support for this kind of stuff, which makes the cards a lot better than they initially appeared. So we talked about Team Magma's Camerupt last week, and I basically said it's got a pretty good ability, 2 attachments per turn, and with a silver bangle it can 2-hit KO any regular EX or 1-hit KO fire weak EXs. Think Virizion, Genesect. I suppose to a lesser degree Jirachi, although a lot of stuff one-hits Jirachi. We've also got Team Magma's Numal, which for a fire and a colourless does 30 damage and you discard an energy, which is not the end of the world, because remember Team Magma's Camerupt's ability Burn Draft allows you to put a fire or a dark energy from your discard pile to Team Magma's Camerupt. But of course you don't really want to be, discarding energy and then attaching it the next turn. It's, but you can, I suppose. Either way, it's a 70 HP basic with a 2 energy attack, so it's not going to see a huge amount of play. Now, the next card is a Pokemon tool, and it's interesting because it is, and I could be wrong here, but I believe it's the first attack tool card which we've seen, other than the G-Booster and the G-Scope, which were released for Genesect. Now, it is Magma Pointer, and it can only be attached to... Well, I think it can be attached to anything. The way it reads is, your Pokemon with Team Magma in its name can also use the attack. So, and again, this is not an official translation, but it suggests that you can attach it to anyone you want, but you can only use the attack if it's a Team Magma Pokemon. And you might think, well, why would you ever do that? But think about these Team Flare tools. Maybe you would attach a Magma Pointer to a Pokemon just to stop it getting head-ringed or jamming netted or something along those lines. And it's essentially, for 1 fighting energy, does 20 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. And presumably you would hit the bench. 2 reasons why this could be useful. First of all, it's a 1 energy attack. Now, it's not ideal, but maybe you attach it to something like, I don't know, a Groudon, Team Magma's Groudon EX. Team Magma's Groudon EX attacks for a fighting colourless. If you pop this on, it would allow you to have an attack you could use while you were building up Team Magma's Groudon EX. Now, I'm not saying this is good or even, even remotely viable, but it gives you an option. It gives you an attack to use while you're building up Team Magma's Groudon EX. Of course, it's going to take 3 more attachments to get its real attack going, and by then you're going to be dead, quite frankly, if you give your opponent 3 free hits on you. But that's just a silly example. There may be better Pokemon. Let's say, for instance, Team Magma's Camerupt, for argument's sake. Maybe, 1 turn you do that attack, and then the next turn you hit a DCE and do Fireball, or you use Burn Draft and attach the next turn in order to attack. It's not ideal, but it's an option. The thing you would probably more use this for is hitting the bench. Now, people who haven't been playing that long might not realise the importance of bench damage, at least historically. Essentially, going back to the Heart Gold Soul Silver era, we had Pokemon Reversal, which was what is now Pokemon Capture. Flip a coin, if heads, bring one of your opponent's Pokemon into the active position from the bench. And then we transitioned into Pokemon Capture, which was that without a flip, and then that's got a flip. We've got Lysandre, and we've got Genesect's Red Signal, and we've had Bright Look from Luxray, and, Ninetales a bit more recently. And it's really important to bring stuff off the bench, because essentially what you really don't want to be doing in this game is allowing your opponent to retreat their Pokemon, pop it on the bench, and then just kind of sit there and survive. That's really what we don't want to do. So we bring it up, they bring them active to finish them, or we hit the bench. And that's what this can be useful for. Just doing 20 damage to a bench Pokemon that's almost dead, not having to use a Lysandre, which will also use your supporter for the turn, and being able to drag something off the bench, just kill something while it's sitting on the bench. Now, just so we're clear, I don't think this is going to be a particularly great card, but I think with cards like this, which are a little bit unusual, sometimes it's fun to have a quick look at them and try and think of ways in which they could be used, or exciting ways. It's not particularly great, but it's one of those things where potentially in the future you never know. Speaking of Team Magma, we've got a Baltoy. It's got 50 HP and it's weak to Psychic, so Mewtwo says hello. It's not ever going to attack. If you want to attack for a Psychic and a Colourless, it does 20 damage to any Pokemon benched or active, but again, you're not going to be using it. One thing that's more interesting is Team Magma's Claydol. Now, this isn't as good as the Great Encounters Claydol, for those of you who played back then, but it has got an ability which is moderately useful. It's called Magma Switch. And it reads, once during your turn, you may move an energy card attached to your Pokemon with Team Magma in its name to another of your Pokemon. Again, this is only a current translation, but the way it's currently written means that you would be able to move it from a Team Magma Pokemon only, but to any Pokemon, Team Magma or not. That may well be something which is revised when we get a proper translation. But it seems to, that's what it says at the moment. And this is kind of useful. It's an energy switch. We all know how useful Energy Switch can be. Now, Team Magma's Claydol does only have 90 HP and it is weak to Psychic, but Energy Switch, things like Aromatisse, these are very, very interesting effects which people use a lot. It allows you to move an energy from an almost dead Pokemon to help power up a new one. It helps you to move an energy to launch a surprise attacker that your opponent hasn't seen coming. It allows you to move an energy before you max potion, etc. And again, the translation we have at the moment allows this to stack. If I've got 2 Claydols out, I can move 2 energy per turn. You see where I'm going with this. This is the kind of support that these Pokemon need. Now, what we haven't actually seen yet is any particularly good attackers, and although I'm intrigued by Team Magma's Camerupt, I don't think it's particularly great. This is the first card in the set which I'm really genuinely intrigued by. But of course, we're going to need some Team Magma attackers before we can really call this a good card. We've seen Team Aqua's Sharpedo, which allows you to search for a Pokemon with Team Aqua in its name. Now we're just waiting for a good Pokemon with Team Aqua in its name. And I suppose I should mention that Team Aqua's Carvana's been revealed. It's got 50 HP, and for a Dark Energy, it does 10 times the amount of damage. 10 damage times the amount of heads you can flip from 2 coins. No one really cares. There's also a Terrible Grimer and then a Muck. And this is a Team Aqua's Muck, I believe. And it's got an ability, Sludge Party. The retreat cost of each of your opponent's Pokemon in play that does not have Team Aqua in its name is 1 colourless more. And this is a bit of a blurry translation, it's not confirmed, but for a Psychic double colourless, it does 60 damage, 90 if they're affected by a special condition. Now again, it's weak to Psychic and it's got 110 HP, so it isn't going to be hanging around too long. But you play something like a Laser, you're doing 90 damage plus 30 for the poison, brings it up to 120. This is looking pretty good. Now what intrigues me about Team Aqua's Mark is the ability. And again, there's nothing here that precludes stacking. So you can get 2 or 3 Muck out and increase the retreat cost by 2 or 3. One thing I should mention, Floatstone brings the retreat cost down to 0 regardless. So it doesn't matter how many Muck are out, Floatstone will go directly through this. So Floatstone is a really easy counter for this, really gosh darn quickly. But we've also got Team Aqua's Hideout, which reads, each Pokemon does not have Team Aqua in its name, pays 1 colourless more to retreat. Now, this affects your non-Team Aqua Pokemon as well as your opponents, but other than that, it's the same as Muck. So have a Muck, have one of these, and your opponent's retreat cost all of a sudden becomes fairly unmanageable. But in the game at the moment, every deck's playing a bunch of Switch, a bunch of Floatstone, etc. So I don't think it's the kind of thing that a lot of people are really going to be playing or seeing a huge amount of success with, but we don't know what's going to happen to the game in future. So I think this is something to keep an eye on rather than something which I think is going to be great right now. The last 2 cards we've got are Team Aqua Grunt and Team Magma Grunt. And these are both promos, and these were the ones which I told you had been revealed but were too small to read. And essentially, you discard a card from your hand to draw 3. That's, TNO, but you've got to discard a card. If you discarded a Pokemon with Team Aqua in its name, or for Team Magma Grunt, Team Magma, draw 1 more card. So you essentially discard 1 to draw 4. And this could be useful, but we haven't seen any Team Aqua or Team Magma cards that revolve around discarding other Team Aqua or Team Magma cards. You can argue that Team Magma's Camerupt really benefits from discarding cards, but it benefits from discarding energy which aren't going to fuel, which is not going to give you the extra card. So most of the time it's just Tiano with less offensive art. Sorry Tiano, I just don't like you. So unfortunately these are not particularly cards we're going to be getting excited about. And finally, a lot of news today, the free pack blisters have been revealed. We're going to get a Furfrou with the Galaxy holofoil. That's the one that looks like it's got little stars in the back. From XY with a fur coat ability, reduces damage by 20. No one plays it, it's garbage. but also the Ditto. The Ditto was a promo which came out in Japan. In Japan, if you buy a booster box, you get a promo card. It was Ditto for this particular set, or the last set, I should say. And it's Ditto in our free pack promos. It's got an interesting ability, attack, stick on for 1 colourless, 10 damage, attach an energy card from your discard pile to this Pokemon, which would be useful if it wasn't for the fact it had 70 HP and a weakness to fighting. It ain't staying around very long. If you're using an attack to set up an attack next turn, you ain't going to last very long. For the record, the art is a Ditto kind of halfway through turning into a Pikachu, which is awesome, and it's got an interesting little ability. If this Pokemon is your active Pokemon, it can use the attacks of your opponent's active Pokemon. You still need the necessary energy to use each attack. So more Mew-EX than Gengar-EX. Remember, Gengar can copy attacks just for a Psychic colourless. You don't need a specific energy, whereas Mew-EX you do. Same thing here. If I want to copy a Land's Judgment, I'm going to have 2 fighting and a colourless when I'm facing down a Landorus. At the end of the day, it's a fun little interesting card, but the fact of the matter is, it's not really got very much going for it in terms of HP and weakness. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about cities today, like I said, but I am going to have a quick mention of cities, and that's because a lovely chap, Charlie Powell, a very well-known and respected UK player who has seen, shall we say, a little bit of success here and there, I think is a polite way to put it, top 32 at Worlds with Kling Klang a couple of years ago, back in 2013. He just won a cities with Tool Drop. Now, I'm going to go into more detail on this next week, but I suppose this is just a nice example of, firstly, Tool Drop is viable. Now, I've talked about this on a previous podcast, but essentially, Dimension Valley allows Trubbish, the Tool Drop Trubbish, to attack for a single Psychic energy. One of the big problems with the old Tool Drop deck was it needed a Psychic and a colourless. So it revolved around the XP share, and if your opponent could stop you keeping energy on the board, then you would lose very quickly. But here you can attack for 1 energy, which makes the deck a lot more consistent. Not to mention the fact that you've also got Lissandra's Trump card, or Last Resort, I forget which was the English name now. But whichever one it was, you've got that. So if all of your tools go away, you can then just put them all back into your deck and start again. Now, the other big Achilles heel to Tool Drop is, of course, you do the amount of damage times by, or the amount of damage is dependent on the amount of tools on the field. Now, Startling Megaphone is a thing. It gets rid of all tools. But the interesting thing is, a lot of people have stopped playing Startling Megaphone. I was chatting to Charlie about this on Facebook last night, or a couple of days ago, whenever it was, and he was explaining to me that an awful lot of decks have actually dropped this particular card, the Startling Megaphone. And even ones that haven't, they tend to play 1. Well, that's not the end of the world. They've got to play it essentially at the exact right time. And even if they do, you can play Lissandra's Trump card and then just get all your tools back again and they're screwed. The other thing you've got is potentially up to 6 Team Flare cards with Jamming Net and between Jamming Net and Headringer. Now, you can only put 6 down because your opponent can only have 6 Pokemon in play, and not only that, but they've all got to be EXs that don't have Pokemon tools on anyway, although you can play your own Megaphone to get rid of the tools they have got on to put the Team Flare tools on. Although then you might be getting rid of more tools than you put on and reducing your own damage. But hopefully you see where I'm going with this. The point is this. A lot of these problems that existed with this particular deck have been solved. And then everybody said, yeah, but you can't play it because of Startling Megaphone. Well, if people aren't playing Startling Megaphone or are only playing 1 copy, and it might be prized or they might not have it when they need it, etc., then actually Tool Drop's well positioned. And let's not forget, it's got really favourable matchups against an awful lot of decks. Evil Town, pretty gosh darn favourable. Just knock out all the EXs nice and quickly. Virizion Genesect, exactly the same deal. It can struggle a little bit with Pyroar because of all the single prizes. Even something like Donphan is going to be struggling to one-hit KO it, because Donphan is going to need, it's going to need a strong energy, and it's going to need a muscle band just to get up to the 80 damage you need to KO the Trubbish. And even then, if they've got a hard charm on, it's not going to get the KO, which sounds a little bit weird, but Donphan can struggle with non-EXs, because you don't get the extra damage if you put on a Silver Bangle, and you don't get the extra damage from Fighting Stadium. Also, Haulager can hit Trubbish by virtue of it being a non-EX. So it's really quite interesting. It does have a bad matchup against Seismitoad, especially if they play Startling Megaphone, which most of them don't nowadays. But essentially, a turn 1 Seismitoad before there are many tools on the field, and it's as good as an auto win. Even if you don't get a bunch of tools on, if they do get a bunch of tools on the field, if you can play a Startling Megaphone and then just, get Seismitoad going blocking trainers with Quaking Punch, you're going to be winning pretty gosh darn quickly. So I'm going to go through cities, like I say, more in more detail next week. I just thought that was a really interesting deck, and one of the things it does show is how you can work cities. City championships go on for quite a while, and we see real ebbs and flows within the format as it does so. You find that decks kind of come in and out of favour. They become bigger and smaller. Donphan saw a hell of a lot more play at the beginning of Cities than it does now. Seismitoad has been steadily increasing in play as Cities goes on. Evil Towel has been pretty much there the whole time. But astute players like Charlie are able to look at the format and go, okay, I've been to a few tournaments now, and I think this deck is primed to do well. And the fact that he won the City Championship in Wakefield, which is one of the more competitive venues in the UK. So the fact that he went to a competitive, and it was about 60 Masters. So the fact that he went to a competitive, well-attended cities and won with a deck like Tool Drop just shows that City Championships are there for the taking if essentially you've got the smarts and, forgive my French, the cojones, and yes, I'm aware that's Spanish, to actually play maybe a less familiar deck, but one that's primed to take advantage of the format like Charlie did. I've had a lot of people get in touch with me over the last couple of weeks about my own attendance or lack thereof at recent cities. And what I'm going to say quite simply is life has gotten in the way. But really, it's a bad coincidence. Last weekend, I was in Cornwall and there were City Championships in Wakefield on the Saturday and Plymouth on the Sunday. Had Plymouth been on the Saturday, like the vast majority of City Championships, I would have got my bad self down there last Saturday. But it was on Sunday when I couldn't make it. Similarly, if Wakefield was this Saturday, I would probably be up there, but I can't get up there because I'm not so free this Saturday. There is an outside chance I'm going to get myself down to the game shop in Aldershot for a City Championship on Saturday, but even if I don't, you guys need to get down there. I've said this many, many times before. Aldershot is one of the best places to play in the UK. If you can get down there, you really should. So anyone in the UK who's got nothing to do on Saturday, get yourself down to the game shop in Aldershot for their City Championship. Just Google Pokemon Aldershot, you will ALDERSHOT, you will find it pretty gosh darn quickly. It is looking, whether I get there or not, and I've got stuff to do on Saturday so I might not, it is looking very like there will be a Yeovil City Championship on Sunday, and I've got a funky little deck in the works. I'm not going to make that many cities. I'm only going to make, I think, 2 more regionals. So, quite frankly, I'm not probably going to attend enough cities to make a realistic run at a Worlds invite. Sorry about that. Which means I'm now going to start playing interesting decks. I think I've got a new take on Seismitoad, which is going to be fun for me and really annoying for my opponents. But I will tell you about that next week if I play it. Whether I do well or not, as always, I shall give ye the inside scoop next week. So we're going to finish off today talking about Manectric. Now, Manectric is a very, very interesting card, and it's one of these. If you go back through my YouTube videos, and I know that's been a little, I'm still having technical problems. I am working it out though, as born through the increasing audio quality of these podcasts, hopefully. But one thing which I did do on my YouTube channel a little while ago, I did the top 10 cards from Phantom Forces, and I deliberately did them right after the set dropped, before we had any tournaments to go on or any of that, judging on potential and what I believed. And Manectric made the list, but maybe not as high as it should. Spoiler alert, if I redo that list, VS Seeker is clearly going to number 1. Manectric probably slots in at number 2. Manectric has seen a lot more play as City Championships have worn on, both here and abroad, and it's been seeing a lot of success. What's interesting about Manectric is very similar to when I was talking about Seismitoad last week. It's seeing a lot of success with a lot of different partners. So Manectric, and the other thing is, although it's got a Mega-EX, it doesn't need the Mega-EX. I've seen plenty of decks do well with just the regular. So the regular Manectric-EX has 170 HP and a weakness to fighting. Now, first of all, that's a bad thing. Donphan is still a thing. Donphan KOs Manectric-EX very easily. Its regular attack does 40 damage. All you need to do then is add a Fighting Stadium to go up to 60. and either a strong energy muscle band to go up to 100, or just a silver bangle regular energy to go up to 90, and you're one hit KOing Manectric-EX with a non-EX for 1 energy. That is not good. Its first attack is Overrun. 20 damage to the active, 20 damage to one of the bench. And this can be pretty fun, pretty exciting, pretty interesting, pretty useful, quite frankly. Because it gives you options straight away in the game. You can start strategically placing some damage down. Let's say, for argument's sake, I'm playing a Seismitoad deck with Manectric and Charizard. Charizard, even with a Muscle Band, is only going to do 160 damage to a Virizion or a Genesect. So if I start off with my Manectric, I can do 20 damage to the active Virizion, 20 damage to the Genesect my opponent's building up on the bench. All of a sudden, that Genesect is now in 1 hit KO range of my Charizard. The other thing this is really quite good against is something like an Yveltal deck. Because if I'm against baby Yveltal, I stick a Muscle Band on there, I'm doing 40 to the active, times by 2 for the weakness, that's 80 to the active, plus 20 to the bench. I'm 2 hit KOing little Yveltal while doing 20 to the bench as well. It's not an amazing attack, not by a long shot. But what it does do is it allows you to have an attack turn 1. And what you don't want to be doing ever, really, is missing a turn 1 attack. And I talked about this last week on the podcast, and I've talked about it many times in the past. I am a big fan of attacking on turn 1. Or attacking for 1 energy, I suppose. Everyone likes attacking turn 1. I played Virizion Genesect at Nationals last year. I was going to say I don't know why, but I do. I was trying to prove to someone it's easy to play. And I think I did prove it, because I did alright. But the point is, with Virizion Genesect, you can get to a point where essentially, the first turn of the game, you attach to Virizion and then pass. But even then, if your opponent runs you out of energy, you just kind of sit there. And I don't like that. I like Manectric-EX. He can attack on the first turn of the game, or he can attack from nowhere for 1 energy. But his really good attack is Assault Laser. For a lightning and a colourless, 60 damage, and then 60 more damage if your opponent has a Pokemon tool attached to it. And you might be thinking, but if my opponent, sees I've got Manectric, they're not going to put a tool down. Well, that's alright. If they don't put a tool down, I've got Team Flare tools, and I can only attach them to EXs, not regular Pokemon. But, if my opponent doesn't put a Muscle Band on their Yveltal EX, well, brilliant. I'll put a Head Ringer on there so they can attack 1 turn later. And then I'm doing 120, which of course will KO a Lightning Weak EX, like Yveltal, for instance. It's a really good attacker. And I spoke about this last week. This can be paired with something like Seismitoad. What I like about Seismitoad, and I talked about this last week, he doesn't need Water Energy. Now don't get me wrong, Water Energy is useful. Grenade Hammer is a very good attack. But you don't need it. You don't need to be able to use Grenade Hammer. Grenade Hammer does 130 to the active, 30 to 2 of your bench Pokemon. Well, Assault Laser does 120, which is only 10 less and doesn't do damage to your bench. And it does it for 2 energy, not 3. So you can be going with your regular Seismitoad deck, but where you would have used Grenade Hammer, you can now just retreat into a Manectric-EX and use Assault Laser. Plus it makes your Yveltal matchup much, much better than it was in the past. So that's your first partner for Manectric-EX. Just play it with Seismitoad. Nice and simple. It adds an extra attacker, it adds that big attack which Seismitoad sometimes needs to finish off the game, and of course, it makes your Yveltal matchup a lot stronger. And Yveltal it's the biggest deck in the format at the moment. It's seeing the most success. It's the deck you need to be most aware of, I would say. Apart from maybe Seismitoad. It's also not bad in the mirror match, because Seismitoad is going to have a tool attached to it. And if they don't, then hopefully you're going to get a turn to put your Head Ringers on, which I think every Seismitoad deck at this stage is playing. And then you can, maybe get even 1 Quaking, I suppose you need slightly more than that. But, a couple of Quaking Punch, and then an Assault Laser, and boom, you've got the KO. Now you're breaking the lock, and as I've talked about with Seismitoad before, you need to be really careful when you break the lock. But the point is, it's an interesting attacker. Moving on to Mega Manectric-EX. He's got 210 HP, but he's still got a weakness to fighting, and I'm going to be honest with you, a lot of fighting decks, they're going to 2-hit KO it very easily. Then it's not going to take all that much to 1-hit KO. You take a Donphan that's doing 40 damage, then you add a Silver Bangle to put it up to 70, then you add a Fighting Stadium to put it up to 90, a Strong Energy to put it up to 110. And I know that's a lot because you need a Silver Bangle and a Fighting Stadium and a Strong Energy, but you're still one-hit KOing it for 2 prizes with a non-EX for 1 energy. Yeah. And it's got an attack which does 110 damage and allows you to attach 2 basic energy cards from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. Now, 2 things about the attack first of all, both regarding the damage. It does not do as much damage as regular Manectric-EX's 2 energy attack, and it does it for a lightning and a colourless, which is the exact same cost. But it's not dependent on anything. Your opponent doesn't need to have a tool attached, you just do 110. And this will of course one-hit KO an Evil Tower, which, as previously mentioned, that's pretty big. 110 isn't amazing, but it's going to basically 2-hit KO anything and 1-hit KO anything that's weak to lightning. But it's got an ancillary effect. It allows you to attach 2 basic energy cards from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. This is why you play Mega Manectric-EX. And I've been playing around with Mega Manectric and I've been doing some testing and doing a lot of thinking, and essentially Mega Manectric and Manectric-EX fall into 2 categories. Are you attacking or are you building up energy on an alternate attacker? If you're just attacking, go for Manectric-EX. Now I know it does have 40 less HP, but really, it's not that much less. It's not going to make a huge difference. You don't need to Mega Evolve. And yes, I know we do have a Spirit Link for Manectric, which is a tool which you attach to Manectric, and then you don't end your turn to Mega Evolve, but that's a fairly clunky mechanic. It'll work sometimes, but not every time. And it takes up space in your deck. If I'm just running a Seismitoad deck, with Manectric, then I'm not going to be running water energy, I'm just going to be running lightning energy. So if I'm just running lightning energy, I don't need to build up energy on an attacker. I just want Manectric there to shore up my Evil Town matchup and to act as a slightly heftier attacker. So I don't need the Mega. But if I want to build up a bigger attacker, that's where Mega Manectric comes in. And possibly the most prominent example of this I've seen is Landorus Manectric. Now, Landorus Manectric is essentially a deck which revolves around, and this one might shock you, Landorus-EX. Now, Landorus is a very good attacker, and it always has been a good attacker. It's seen play on and off since it came into the format, but with all the fighting support we've got, it's become, shall we say, better. Now, Landorus' first attack does 30 to the active, 30 to the bench for 1 fighting energy. This is good, it's not amazing. But time you add a strong energy and a fighting stadium and a muscle band to this, now we're doing 70 damage to the active, 30 to the bench for 1 energy. This is pretty good. But you're still not one-hit KOing. If they're fighting weak, you're having a laugh. If they're not fighting weak, you can struggle. What we really want is Landorus-EX's second attack, Land Judgment. This does 80 damage for 2 fighting and a colourless, but if you discard all fighting energy attached to this Pokemon, the attack does 70 more damage. So now you're doing 150, you add a muscle band, you're doing 170, and that's going to KO most stuff. You add in a fighting stadium to that, and now it's doing 190, 2 EXs, and now you're talking. This is where Mega Manectric comes in. You can still use Manectric as an attacker exactly like I've said you could, like we've just been talking about. And you can still use Landorus as an attacker, exactly like I've said. But now we've got Landorus's Land Judgment, which, as I've said, Fighting Stadium, Muscle Band, you're KOing any EX. If they're not an EX, then you don't, okay, Fighting Stadium won't work, but you're doing 170 damage, so you're KOing any non-EX anyway. Now this is good. The other thing is here, it removes the reliance on strong energy. You can run it with just lightning and fighting energy. With a lot of Seismitoad around at the moment and Enhanced Hammer back in the format, one problem for a lot of decks at the moment is if you're running special energy, Enhanced Hammer can really screw you over, and that hurts fighting decks. Fighting decks need strong energy to do more damage. Your opponent plays Enhanced Hammer, your strong energy goes away, and your damage has been reduced. So Mega Manectric comes out, He attaches basic fighting from the discard to your bench Landorus, and then you do a big attack without needing any special energy. You just need a couple of lightning and a bunch of fighting. That, ladies and gentlemen, is pretty useful. Not only that, but you can do 2 fighting, 1 lightning on a Landorus, and then you're only discarding 2 energy to do Lance Judgment, not all 3 like you would have to if you were only playing fighting energy. Then, of course, you discard 2 energy on Landorus in order to do Lance Judgment. Then you bring Mega Manectric active, do Turbo Bolt for 110. You can then put those 2 energy back onto the bench Landorus, ready to Lance Judgment the next turn. And although Landorus has a big retreat cost, which means you're going to basically need to switch out of it, Mega Manectric has free retreat, which is even better. And essentially, and this isn't the only way to play the deck, but the ideal perfect way to play the deck is use Mega Manectric to set up a couple of Landorus, or even just 1 Landorus, and then you just Lance Judgment, and as soon as you can't Lance Judgment anymore because you're out of energy, you just switch into a Mega Manectric, Turbo Bolt for 110, and build up your Landorus at the same time, and off you go. Not to mention the fact that as you're getting rid of a lot of energy and recycling energy, that would make the deck a prime Max Potion candidate. Essentially, Max Potion, this is, for those that have forgotten, a trainer which allows you to heal all damage on your Pokemon if you're willing to discard all energy attached to it. And essentially, Max Potion is near broken in any deck that doesn't mind discarding all of their energy. So, for instance, say I've got a Mega Manectric with 2 energy attached on the bench. I attack with Landorus to do Lance Judgment. I've then got 1 or 0 energy attached to it. I play a Max Potion to get rid of all the damage, switch into a Manectric, attach 2 fighting energy using Turbo Bolt, and then I can just attach an energy next turn. There's free energy on Landorus, off we go again. Now, I haven't actually seen the list, although I'm sure if I asked him he'd show me, but friend of the podcast, Mark Levy, has, or Levy, I should ask him how that's pronounced. Mark, get in touch, tell me if it's Levy or Levy. And he went and won a Cities with a Manectric Landorus. It's a very, very good deck. Now, the third Manectric deck, which has seen a lot of play... Oh, actually, before we get to Manectric Eviltal, there's one other thing Mega Manectric does, and I can't believe I forgot this. This is vitally important. It destroys Pyroar. It does 110 damage, which coincidentally is the exact amount of HP that Pyroar has. Being a Mega EX means it's evolved, means it goes through Pyroar's ability, which means you can run an all-basic deck, an all-EX deck, and yet Mega Manectric comes out, it's got 210 HP. At the very, very most, if they have a Muscle Band and discard an energy, Pyroar's going to be able to do 110 damage, which will 2-hit KO you. Now, in reality, the chances of them having 2 Pyroar, both with Muscle Bands attached, ready to attack one after the other, is not that great, and that's what they need to KO you. So you're going to go up and KO a Pyroar, then they're going to need to have free energy and a Muscle Band on a Pyroar to do 110. You're then going to KO that Pyroar, and then they're going to need another Pyroar with free energy and a Muscle Band to KO you. If they don't, you're just going to run through all their Pyroars and win very, very quickly. That's the other thing Mega Manectric does that I really should have mentioned. So if you're struggling with Pyroar, or you want to build up a big attacker, Mega Manectric, if you just want an efficient, low-cost attacker that hits for a very exciting and fairly common weakness, lightning, you just go for regular Manectric. Now, the one other deck I want to talk about here is Manectric Eviltal. And essentially, this works in the same way any Eviltal deck works. Now, the good thing about Manectric is it takes 1 lightning, 1 colourless. So you don't need to put many lightning into your deck in order to use this. Most Eviltal decks are already playing Professor's Letter, which allows you to search out your 1 or 2 or your 2 lightning you've probably put in your deck, which means you can afford to only put a couple in there. It means that you've got a big edge in the mirror match, and it also means that you've got an efficient, low-cost attacker if you need him. Now, to be fair, Eviltal itself is a fairly efficient, low-cost attacker, but it gives you another one. It gives you a different kind of weakness. It gives you an attacker against Manectric, because you really don't want to be fighting Manectric with an Eviltal, but you can fight a Manectric with a Manectric. And they're the 3 decks that have seen the most success. Seismitoad with Manectric. And I know Luke Kirkham has just top cut 2 cities in a row with a Seismitoad deck involving Manectric. Not the Mega, I believe, just the regular. Although keeps managing to avoid Eviltal in Top Cut. Managed to get into a top 4, where there were 2 Eviltal decks, him and somebody else, playing, I believe, Virizion Genesect, and instead of either of the Eviltal decks, pretty much auto wins, he played the Virizion Genesect. His worst matchup. Sorry, Luke. Mega Manectric, Landorus, and you really do need the Mega in that deck. You don't need the Mega, but it helps. Land's Judgment is such a good attack that you really can't ignore it. You can still have just Landorus and Manectric, being 2 efficient, low-cost attackers that hit for different weaknesses, but really you want the both of them in there. You want the Manectric and the Mega Manectric. And popping it into Eviltal. And I suppose that leads me to kind of the last thing to say about Manectric, and that's just, I've given you 3 different examples of decks that use Manectric and have been successful with Manectric. But the reality is, Manectric attacks for a lightning and a colourless. It makes it very, very easy to splash it into basically any deck you like. All you need is just 1 or 2 lightning and 1 or 2 Manectric, and all of a sudden, you've got a lightning attacker. In decks like Seismitoad that don't mind, what energy they play, this becomes even better. Now, I suppose the last thing to mention here is Aromatisse. And I know I said the last thing was the last thing, but this really is the last thing. Now, I'm going to talk more about Aromatisse in future podcasts because I don't have time today. And to be fair, with next week being City Championships results, maybe in 2 weeks we'll get around to talking about Aromatisse properly. But there are 2 builds of Aromatisse. There is the full-on Fairy edition, which is just Xerneas, Xerneas-EX, Mewtwo, Aromatisse, Go. Or you can play it with 4 Rainbow Energy. And of course, Rainbow Energy count as Fairy Energy, so they can be moved around at will by Aromatisse. Which means if you're already playing 4 Rainbow Energy, you can just put 1 Manectric into your deck, and then you just move 1 Rainbow, 1 Fairy Energy onto Manectric using Aromatisse, and then you've got a really good attacker against Eviltal. So Manectric is Aromatisse's friend as well. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is basically what you need to know about Manectric. There are plenty of other decks I could have mentioned, but hopefully in the discussion we've had about those particular decks and Manectric in general, anything which I haven't explicitly mentioned, you could kind of, you could have got it yourself. You can take what I've gone and kind of run with it and apply it to other decks and other cards and all that good stuff. Now, next week I'm going to be back, hopefully talking about City Championship results, unless there's other exciting things that take precedence in before that. In the meantime, make sure you do the usual things. Tweet me at @TheWassy, email me at ptcgradio@hotmail.co.uk, go and check out my YouTube channel, just search PTCG Radio on YouTube, and you'll find that pretty gosh darn quickly. Don't forget also to send the podcast around to your friends, get them involved, subscribe on iTunes, all that good stuff. You know how it works by now. The YouTube channel will be making a comeback. Please don't forget about that. It's going to be happening. I'm thinking about doing a video showing you all the stadiums. Our stadium wars are, they're getting more prevalent. So let me know what you think about that idea, and let me know any other ideas of YouTube videos that you've got which you think it might be fun if I had a go at. Until then, I will be back next week. Thank you very much for listening. Look after yourself till next week. My name's Ross, and you've been listening to PTCG Radio. Pedantic Peter perfectly pops the particularly perplexing pimple.